We've talked a lot about the offense here in the first 20 minutes of the show, and I know there's been a lot of commentary around Ohio State fandom around the defense. Much of it praiseworthy because there have been some really good moments so far, but fairly some concerns. Um, is the defensive line playing up to their standard? I thought the coaching staff, I don't know that I would think they took the easy way out, but they were quick to say, well, how much pass rush are you going to generate against a triple option in week one? And how much pass rush are you going to generate against a Youngstown State team that, the ball was in and out of their hand in 2 seconds in week two most of the time? Um, I just felt like there were more stalemates at the line of scrimmage where, even on the interior, where like I think Ohio State has had decent play from their defensive tackles. It's not like they're regressing and they're getting pushed around. They're just not collapsing the pocket quite the way I expected, given everything we'd heard and seen, leading up to this point through camp and what we know about in spring ball. So I want to see a big week from those guys. And Jim Knowles talked today in a pretty open, or I should say, talked yesterday in a pretty open manner about his need to make some adjustments from a schematic and general approach perspective, because he's not coaching at Duke or Oklahoma State anymore. He's coaching Ohio State with guys that, with all due respect to the previous stops that Coach Knowles has had along the way, he's coaching a different caliber and different depth of roster than he's had previously. So he was asked today, hey, there were instances where you blitzed a lot. There were instances where you didn't. Did you blitz more than you wanted to, or did you not blitz as much as you thought you would? And some of the questions I think he danced around a little bit, but this one was really interesting when he started to touch on his willingness to adjust his coaching philosophy given the kind of talent he's working with. Here's Coach Knowles.
I guess maybe as part of your philosophy, how important are like havoc plays behind the line of scrimmage, tackle for loss and sacks, and when you come out of a game where you're playing an FCS opponent, you only get 3 tackles for loss against team that runs the ball a lot. Is that not meeting the standard, or do you not concern yourself with those kind of plays?
I think I've adjusted. I think when you're at places where you need to live in that world, feast or famine type of world where you're trying to make sure that you take a lot of chances, do a lot of different things to somehow gain the advantage. I think I've adjusted my philosophy here because we have different players, and my job is to make sure that we win the game, not get the TFLs. And a lot of times I think the best philosophy here is to let the guys play, keep the points off the board.
That adjustment from Oklahoma State
Absolutely.
to here, when did that kind of flip for you, I guess?
Probably last year when we experienced some issues. Yeah. It was, I think if you live in that world against teams that, where you have a skill advantage, it can look really nice. But when you get into the matchup games, I found that it can hurt you. So you need to be able to adjust.
Knowles was asked a lot about his time in the Big 12 and whether or not this Western Kentucky team looked like Big 12 offenses, and how, frankly, he was asked point blank, was your success over the last couple of years you were at Oklahoma State and had a top 5 defense nationally, was that success a direct byproduct of the aggressive nature of your play calling? And he said, unquestionably, yes. So again, I give Coach Knowles some credit here for being able to pull back for a guy that wants to get after you, for him to say, no, maybe we're not going to bring 5 or 6 and have some weaknesses elsewhere in the defense. He said point blank, Anthony, my job's not to get tackles for loss, it's to win games. And later in the press conference, he said, sometimes that means you got to get the damn ball back, because there were times defense couldn't get off the field, even though they ultimately didn't give up points. said it's not good enough to just get a check. You need a check plus. But there's an element of, hey, maybe if I get a little more conservative with my play calling and trust that these guys can go create some havoc and go play, that maybe that would be a better way to avoid giving up some big plays. I'm interested to see how that works against some teams that really want to chuck it.
Yeah, and I think two things come to mind when I listen to that clip. The first is the team's going to hear that and really appreciate his humility towards the situation and really appreciate his ability to adjust. Like, hey, hand up. This is mine. I needed to make this change. And that's your coach standing in front of the media and saying it with the microphones right in front of his face and saying, hey, I needed to adjust and I needed to get better. And you appreciate that as a player, being like, hey, coach didn't throw any of us under the bus. He said he needed to adjust and get better. So that's the first thing that I take away. And the second thing is, from his perspective, think back to his days, like you said, at Duke or Oklahoma State, where, hey, on Monday or on Sunday when they're watching the tape of their upcoming opponent, they're like, all right, this team's better at their outside receivers are better than our corners, or their tight ends are better than our safeties. So we have to protect our guys. We have to protect our corners or our safeties. And you do that by having to do crazy blitzes and having to get those TFLs and having to have strip sacks and big plays. And that when you don't get those, that's when the big plays start to happen. Well, now Ohio State, everywhere you look, pretty much regardless of the week, you have the advantage. So now you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to draw up exotic stuff. You can just let your guys play. And if you do want to get aggressive, guess what? Denzel Burke's going to knock the ball away if you don't get home. Or, Sonny Styles is going to make a play, a freak play that saves a touchdown if the blitz doesn't work. So that allows him as a play caller to be like, all right, hey, we can be aggressive if we want, but we can also pull off the reins and it's not going to kill us. And that's something, like he's had to adjust from his stops at different places because he's dealing with a whole different unit and a bunch of really, really skilled players.
It's my opinion that that's a trust that gets developed over time, right? It's Denzel Burke saying at the beginning of the year, the reason why he's looked so good and felt so comfortable is because he knows exactly what the system is and what he is required to do. And he can go play with this relentless, passionate aggression because he knows where he's supposed to be and he can go make plays. He's not guessing. And there were definitely some bad moments for him last year. But I would imagine that, when Jim Knowles sees Jordan Hancock, Sonny Styles, Lathan Ransom, Tommy Eichenberg, Steel Chambers going and making the plays that they are, and certainly involving in the pass rush too. Mike Hall is a dude. You can feel Mike Hall, and Ryan Day even alluded to that yesterday. When Mike Hall's in there, he plays with an attitude, and frankly, I'd like to see more guys play like that. So it's a trust that the players build up with the coaching staff, where maybe it's a little easier for Jim to say, okay, I've seen this enough times to know that I don't need to call some crazy exotic blitz scheme here because I think our guys can go get it done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then it goes back to, what really prompted the question, like, is the defensive line not playing up to expectation? Sure. Yeah, we expected them. We expected JT and Jack Sawyer to be these dominant forces, and it just hasn't happened yet. And it's all pretty much been the opposing team's scheme to this point. You're going to start seeing a little bit different approach to Ohio State here in this week especially, and then next week coming down the pipe, where it's going to look more like the football we're used to seeing. Where quarterbacks are going to be dropping back. They're going to be going through reads. There's going to be time for JT to get home. And especially this week, like, they're going to throw it, 66% of the time. They're pretty much 2-1 throwing the ball. And there's going to be a lot of quick stuff. Don't get me wrong. They'll throw a lot of bubble screens and things like that. They're also going to drop back, and it's going to allow the defensive line to actually become a part of the game, which they haven't been able to do for these past couple of weeks. So I think the defense you'll see on Saturday is going to look a lot different than what you've seen these past couple of weeks.